Welcome back to part 2 of today's first plenary on reporting. I'd like to thank Ashley and Alder, the chair of IOSCO, and Eric from GRI and Janine from SASB, who have got us going in the discussion today. Here for part 2, I am really pleased to have Hiro Mizuno back. Those of you who were watching last week will have heard Hiro talking about climate action, the role of investors, and a wide range of issues in terms of the transition that we need to see. Today, I'm really pleased that Hiro's here to answer your questions. So I can see some questions already coming in for you, Hiro. So I think we're going to have a bit of a rapid fire question. For anyone who doesn't know, Hiro was the Chief Investment Officer of JPIF, Japan's largest pension, well, the largest pension fund in the world, but it is now on the board of Tesla. You give advice to Danone, special advisor to the government of Japan, many roles, Hiro, so welcome.
Thank you for having me again, and I hope that you enjoyed my the speech on the other day. Thank you for having me once again for the A4S Summit. Brilliant.
So if we get going in terms of some of the questions, one of the ones that I'd like to put to you first is around the picking up on some of the points that Janine, Eric, and Ashley were discussing in part 1. So we're seeing a huge amount of activity in the reporting agenda. You, as a former investor, now sitting on a number of boards and advisory committees, what kind of information do you need to make decisions, whether around climate or other ESG issues, and where do you feel the biggest gaps are?
Well, first of all, let me start with the sort of gap I used to struggle with, which was, on one hand, as the largest, the asset owner in the world, and the largest public pension fund at the JPIF, we continue to promote ESG or sustainability reporting, and I had the honor to, contribute to the A4S, the efforts on that, on that journey, but the more we encourage our portfolio company to disclose ESG or sustainability information, and at the same time, we urged JPIF, the external money managers or like a big asset managers, to make sure they use such information in their investment analysis as well as decision making. And the gap we really struggled was, that we hear a lot from the corporate executives saying, like, as JPIF encourage us to do more, the disclosure on these issues, hoping that we will get more support from investors. But in reality, every time we, produce extra information on this ESG, we just attracted more negative, the scrutiny into our operation, and actually the costed us, right? So I think that's the gap we really need to address. So on one hand, investor is now demanding, not only encouraging, but demanding the portfolio company to disclose those information. It's actually, kind of create the responsibility on the investor side to use it, right? So every year, JPIF runs the survey among the portfolio companies as well as our asset managers. How do you use integrate reporting? And I have a nice memory when I had the honor to meet His Royal Highness for the first time. I noticed his frustration that the integrated reporting is not the picking up in Japan. But now, after 3-4 years, we have one of the largest, number of the companies who uses integrated reporting. So number of the company who report those information increased. But at the time, every time we get a survey, they show their frustration. they don't think investors actually using it. So I think the first step we need to make sure is, as an investor, we are demanding the corporate to do that. So we need to make sure we should commit to use that information for real purpose, not to just tick boxes, but the real purpose, which is like, the use it for investment analysis and decision making, right? So that's kind of the sort of mutual commitment is necessary. And after that, we should talk about the what information we are really looking for. And SASB actually took the approach, like first started with the investors asking which information you think material, right? And GRIs, in my opinion, more started with the company side or business side, which they think they should report. So that the merger actually give me a kind of sense of hope that it will integrate both sides, because we need to go through that matching process, right? Because at the end of the day, it's investors' decision which information they wanted to use. But now investors also under pressure to make a good use of those information. So I think now we have so many, standard setters in sustainability or ESG reporting, but we still need some matching effort and a matching process. And every year, JPIF asks the asset manager out of list of ESG agendas, which one you think most critical? And some asset manager, that picks just a few. The other people pick like 20 of them. So it's also reflect investors don't know exactly which information they are looking for. So it's just a matter of the process that we need to match up both sides, which is really critical.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to that end to add that it's often easy to put investors in one bucket, but you've got a huge diversity of different types of investors, different goals, and therefore it's not surprising that the kind of information that different investors need and want is very different.
Yeah,
and you can't just have one single answer. It's going to carry on having that diversity.
And also to some extent, I repeatedly said this is probably providing the best opportunity for the professional asset managers to make a difference. Because if you believe in the efficient market or perfect market hypothesis, right? Once all the information becomes available and shared by everybody, the market will take extra return making ability away from investors, right? So at the moment, obviously, we just don't have a consistent and standardized and a categorical data set. So this creates a good opportunity for investors to prove they can actually process the different set of information. But at the end of the day, at the moment, the variety of information they are asking for is too different. And that's created too much cost on the corporate side. So I think at the end of the day, either standard setting organization kind of merge or like integrate, or investor makes their decision which standard is most useful for their purpose. So use the market like a power to just select the good standard, and then that will make it prevail. But I think we are still at the point like people are just people talk about totally different things.
Yeah, and I think you are starting to see that convergence. So earlier we had Janine and Eric talking about how SASB and GRI, and I thought your perspective there was a really interesting one, that they're which is quite right. They've come from different places in terms of the question they're trying to answer. Yeah. But actually that increasing collaboration, that discussion around potentially joint standard setting and really making sure there's a common core, will help to bridge that gap. Now, what are your views around that? There's been a lot of discussion around mandatory. So should we, is that the solution? Are there, is there enough ground already for mandatory to be put in place? It's starting to be mandatory in quite a lot of parts of the world, so I think it's coming. But I'd love to hear your views on whether that will be the way to close the data gap that some people still feel is out there.
Yeah, well, that's the exactly the discussion I have had with the Mark Carney over the last several years. You know, the TCFD, I strongly supported his effort to, and also Mary Shapiro's effort to promote the TCFD as the the disclosure framework for the climate risk. And as a result, now Japan has the highest number of supporters for TCFD, probably touring over 300. That was achieved because it was not mandatory. Because if it becomes a mandatory, it basically leaves no room for the disclosure to have some error, right? So they'd have to be very, very precise, and they have to be correct all the time. So the flip side of coin of the mandatory, like a disclosure requirement, is basically they leaves no room for the corporate to be, vague or incorrect, right? So, the one of the disadvantage of the making it mandatory disclosure is it will make the corporate defensive, and making the corporate defensive at this point of time, is it actually beneficial for us to promote this agenda? So my answer at that time, at least like 3 years ago, was no. At the moment, it's better to keep it the voluntarily, so that we have a low hurdle for the corporate to try to disclose them. So, but on the other hand, now the Japanese government, I think I'm very happy to discuss with them, is it possible to make it mandatory? Because if, let's say, 1/3 of the listed company already signed up to TCFD, it's created a much lower hurdle for regulator to make it mandatory. And making it mandatory at the very early stage, another disadvantage is, regulator cannot set the regulation or rules without consulting the market or like a corporate, the business community. And if they do it too early, there's a two possibility that, the regulator have to make a lot of compromise, or, they leave the business behind. So I think I'm still a little bit skeptical whether we can make it mandatory around the world at the same time. But if you look at the Asian stock exchange, there are a lot of Asian stock exchange already making it as a mandatory listing rules. So there are different ways to make it either really mandatory or like a quasi-mandatory. And but I think my strategy about 3 years ago is, keep it loose to bring more people on board. And if the more people use it, it becomes the sort of like a de facto standard, and it will make the regulators' role job much easier. So I think obviously I'm sure UK will challenge it at the next COP26. Because as I understand, that's what the Mark Carney told me before. And, Japan probably is getting, more ready to do that. And some countries market maybe not. But I think what is really important for us is bring as many corporates as possible and as many investors as possible to start using that kind of information somehow. So I'm actually, I used to be very much against making it mandatory. Now I think the some country, including Japan, is getting closer to make it, and the other market maybe not yet. So we just have to be a little bit practical.
Yeah, and I do think your point on that mix of sort of quasi or soft mandatory. I mean, to be honest, you've got more and more of the very large asset managers and investors asking very clearly for reporting against, say, TCFD and other standards, which for companies then around the world really have to respond to that. We've also just had the latest KPMG global survey on reporting, and I think the headline statistic there is something like 80% of, now I suspect that's the larger companies, but so it does feel like we have got to that point of critical mass, at least in many countries and at the larger end of the scale.
Yeah.
for a fairly easy pathway then to mandatory. And for companies, there is a benefit. That is something that will help to streamline these requests that they're getting. So I do think there's a balance there for companies as well.
And also we probably be able to, kind of arbitrage between the different standards, because the TCFD is very high level conceptual framework of disclosure. And SASB and GRI, they are much more technical, right? So, I decided to champion TCFD, in Japan, is like because it's very high level framework of disclosure. So that's probably the as a good first step. And then they get to become more and more technical, because they at the end of the day they need a very, very precise and a technically the analyzable information set. But at the beginning, it's better to have the people to set them in a framework. So I think now there are so many TCFD and other the sustainability disclosure standards, and some are more high level, the others more technical and the details. So that kind of like a combination is another way for us to think.
Yeah. And do you have a view about the role that the IFRS Foundation could play? So they've just done their consultation. We're speaking to them in the next session in a couple of hours' time. So I'd be interested, do you think that they could help to drive that convergence?
IFRS, obviously, yeah, sure, certainly. Those kind of like authority in the accounting standard definitely can play a big role here. But I also, can easily sympathize. They have to make sure what they are talking about, right? They're a standard setter. So, and also, they have very complicated governance to bring in all the different level of like interest and that different level of readiness. So I'm sympathetic that they feel the pressure, but they actually will find it very difficult for themselves to really integrate the sustainability in their rules. But just even their sort of demonstration of interest, just directionally, will help this movement a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's quite a lot of discussion, or to your point there, that they're not necessarily known for speed, because they have to bring everyone on board and have that due process. And actually, particularly when it comes to something like climate, clearly there is a need for the information for decisions to reallocate investments now. So you need to balance those trade-offs and have a much quicker process in place.
Yeah, it's the same as like if the IFRS said something, it comes with a penalty from the company's perspective, right? So they just want to make sure if they demand some particular information to be disclosed, it has to be quantifiable.
Yeah.
Right. So the one of the things which I found, like the GRI as well as like a TCFD, there are a lot of like a qualitative disclosure. But when it comes to the real accounting standard, they have to be quantified. So there's a gap. But when the JPIF produced the first TCFD compliance report, we bought a lot of like a data from the third-party providers, and there are some of them was already there providing the information. So just try one of those. And but I think that now we hear the IFRS and we hear from the others. It just people is becoming this ESG or sustainability disclosure will become our rule of the game. That's really important, because over the last several years we had several conversations with you, Jessica, and 3 years ago, to be honest, if I talk to the three professionals in the industry, one was very passionate about the sustainability, and the second is really negative. The third one is totally indifferent. But now I definitely hear from probably 2 out of 3, or maybe 3 out of 3. They think this is going to be important. So I think we've actually passed the first the milestone. And now the more of these kind of authority shows their interest in, or like a will to integrate or incorporate this sustainability into their standard. It will create a momentum, and the momentum will make it easier for those authority to change the rule.
Yeah. So we've got time, I think, for one more quick question. Mm-hmm. So I'd love just to hear your final thoughts from an Asia regional perspective. How do you see this evolving in the current year or two? Do you think that we will get sustainability reporting becoming the norm, whether it's mandatory or not, collaboration across the region? How do you see the change evolving?
Well, I think the Asia is a little bit behind the curve, but there's, as I said, actually most number of the sustainability stock exchange effort is actually signed up by the Asian stock exchanges. So I think it's taking place, but I'm a little bit skeptical about in 2 or 3 years time, we have one standard for one framework, so that everybody just don't have to worry, work hard to find the right one. We probably have to live with several, standards or several framework for the time being. But again, I just want to reiterate my point. This is the job of the investors. I mean, if everything is quantified and everybody can make the decision of just using the textbook, I think asset management industry probably wouldn't need a human anymore. I mean, we just can use a machine to do that. So we are going to navigate this through. And what is important is actually I'm touching upon the other question, how I did it at the JPIF. What I really found it very difficult was a lot of people just don't want to take action until they are sure they have every tools to do that. But history of the investment tells us somebody who just decided to go ahead and do some judgmental call with then available information turned out to be a good investment, right? So I think the answering some of the question I saw in the chat box is the biggest struggle I had with the JPIF when I promoted this was they said, "Oh, Mr. Mizuno, there's not standardized information. There's no the academic research prove ESG contribute to the performance. So it's a lack of something." Is always the biggest pushback. So I think we should keep working on this a disclosure standard, and we see a lot of a positive move, merger of the different standard, the setters. But at the same time, we just need to make sure that it's a role of a human asset manager, human investors to actually navigate through this a little bit this little bit chaos. But what is really important is 4 or 5 years ago when I started, we are not even sure whether we are actually creating a big river into a certain direction. But now I think everybody's they agree that the river is flowing into this direction. We are going to go into more sustainable economy, and investors need to work on the sustainability, the analysis of the portfolio they are making, and then we can find tools. So I think the first milestone, I'm sure we made it, and next milestone is probably we'll have some time that we need to work harder to decide which one. But I think that's good because that's create a competition among those standard setters as well, and the stock market as well, as the who can serve their investor and also the company listed on that stock exchange better. Just don't get intimidated by the fact that it's not perfect yet. That's create a great opportunity for investors.
Fantastic. I think that that is a great place to leave it, Hiro. So thank you so much for coming back, answering all of those different questions. Really insightful as always. So really good to have you with us.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Thanks,
Hiro. And just to remind everyone, the next session that we have is a live Q&A with the IFRS Foundation. So if you want to ask them directly about the work that they're doing, what role they should play, then do join us for that. And then later, for everyone interested in what's happening in Europe, they're also planning to put in place sustainability standards. So do join us for both of those live Q&As later on today. Thanks again, Hiro, and to our other speakers for this opening plenary.